All right, we're live. Here goes the video. All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's live. We're coming to you from Washtenaw County. It says Tim on the screen, but we got Tim and Dennis here at Hayes State Park. We just finished up our turkey hunt this morning. We're going to be down here for a few more days, and we're gonna do some fishing. Hopefully, get after some crappie, and panfish, bass.
I'm hoping a little walleye.
Maybe some walleye. I don't know. He knows this area, not me. So, Robert, where are you joining us from tonight?
Good old Grand Traverse County.
Absolutely. What you got going on up there? What are you in the midst of?
Waiting on my season to start. I'm watching you guys all picking birds off and everybody sending stuff in, and I'm just itching. I'm just waiting now. The old finger's itching, and I just can't squeeze it yet.
Your time is coming.
Yep.
And Jordan, up in the UP, what have you been up to lately? I know you've been out doing a little scouting for smelt season. What else?
Yeah, it's been a little bit cold, and we haven't had much rain until just recently. So the river levels were kind of down from where we'd like to see them. A little bit cold, but yeah, there's some steelhead starting to trickle a little bit, and I haven't seen anything for smelt yet in the west end. I know over on the east end of the UP, down around the Carp River and all that off of Lake Michigan, they were getting some last week. So I don't know. I think in the next 7 to 10 days, we ought to see what's going to happen here. Get the water temps to come up a little bit. We've had a bunch of rain, kind of scattered thunder showers here and there. So the water levels are up. Water's a little fast, a little dirty right now. But, you know, it's hard to tell because some years you'll get the smelt. They come right up in that. We call it the chocolate milk. They run in the chocolate milk. You can't even see 6 inches, but they're in there. But I don't know. I'm not much for blind dipping myself. I like to get in there and I like to kind of spot and stalk my smelt. I'm a little bit of a freak that way.
Right. That's something I've never done. I'd like to try eventually some days, get up there and do a little smelt dipping. Sounds like it'd be a good time.
It's fun, and you know, usually right about the same time frame, you get those walleyes that are still in the rivers. I mean, you can see some dandy female walleyes just go right between your boots, which is really cool. And you know, me and my oldest boy Caleb last year, when the smelt were slow, we'd just go out and we'd spear the snot out of some suckers and smoke them babies up.
Nice. Yeah, that'll be a good time. It looked like you and your boy were out deer scouting too earlier today, huh?
Yeah, we sure were. I took Lincoln out on a little 4-wheeler ride and checked a couple of the local honey holes, looked at some rubs from last year, and we didn't find any sheds, but boy, we sure looked hard.
Yep. Hey, it's always a good time to get out in the woods, and I know Lincoln, I think he's got just as much passion as most adult men do, so that's cool to see you guys out there getting it done. So tonight, we want to talk about what's going on with deer regulations, the changes at hand, and of course, what better guy to talk to than our own Jordan, who is chair of the UP D.A.T, which is the Deer Advisory Team. So he's definitely going to be able to shed a lot of light. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop those in the comments, and we'll try to get them posted. And towards the end there, we'll have Jordan maybe answer a few questions. But Jordan, if you could kind of give us an overall, it used to be DMI, then it got changed to D.A.T. Why was it changed? And I mean, what's truly the difference between DMI and D.A.T.?
So you're absolutely right. There was a change that took place last year. It was known as the DMI, or Deer Management Initiative, and that was something that was requested by and operated under the authority of the Natural Resources Commission. And the DNR more or less functioned as kind of a proctor for the whole thing. You know, Chad Stewart obviously was neck deep in that and helped to steer things a little bit. but it was operated under the direction of the Natural Resources Commission. After that concluded last spring, it was kind of a one and done scenario. So the DMI was technically disbanded at that point. And the department decided that they saw value in continuing to have an advisory team of some sort, style, or variety for deer, because they are the flagship species in the state of Michigan. And they put together the D.A.T, or Deer Advisory Team. Pretty basic. So it functions similarly to the DMI in that there's a UP team and an LP team, just like there was last year. And for the most part, a lot of the same folks that served last year. There's a couple changes in both teams, I think, but for the most part, it's pretty well the same group of people, which is nice because everybody's all up to speed and working off the same information. We don't have anybody that's lagging behind. So from the perspective of being able to just pick up the torch and go to work, it's been good.
Good. And Jordan, you've taken on a new role this year as chair of the D.A.T. So we had you on actually before you joined us here at Michigan Outdoors Report, talking, as part of the DMI last year for the UP team. What truly inspired you or gave you that drive to step up and take that chair position this year?
Deer have just been a lifelong passion for me since I was just a little boy, like my son's age, Lincoln's age. Any chance I had, I was at the Washtenaw County Sportsman's Club with my dad, or I was downtown at JR Custom Archery they had back in the day, because we lived down there in the Lower Peninsula when I was very young. And I don't know, we always had things to do in the outdoors, and 9 times out of 10 it was deer centric. So I just grew up with that way of life and that love of deer and the passion for the outdoors. And my old man was very avid about being engaged in the process with deer regs and with the legislature and all those sorts of things. And he began to educate me as a young man about the importance of being involved beyond your tree stand. He certainly lived that out, because I can't even tell you the number of nights I would walk by his study and it would be late into the evening and there was just piles of pie charts and bar graphs and data all over the desk. And invariably he was studying something to do with deer, and at that point we lived up in Calumet here in the Upper Peninsula, and he would travel back and forth between Calumet and Lansing all the time on deer business. It made quite an impression on me as a young man, seeing that dedication from him to something so much bigger than himself. And as I grew and as I matured, it just was a natural progression, I guess, for me to take on those responsibilities. And, I'm certainly painfully aware of a lot of the shortfalls and issues at hand, not only in the UP, but also the LP to some extent. And I wanted to be part of the solution and, not just talking trash in the cheap seats.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously us being field staff together and friends, we know how passionate you are and how you truly live, eat, and breathe deer. I swear, I don't know anybody more than a deer junkie than you. Sorry, I can't even talk. So yeah, we're very proud of you for the work you're putting in and all the travel and just everything that comes with it. So thank you for stepping up on behalf of the UP residents and truly everybody in the state of Michigan that loves this heritage that we have. So obviously when we talk about the 2024 DMI team, there was a lot of work put into that, and unfortunately there was a lot of disappointment. I think both in the Lower Peninsula and Upper Peninsula. So when we look at what happened in 2024 with the DMI and then now with the D.A.T, what kind of changes or relationships are you hoping to build, maybe from your experience in 2024, and apply that to hopefully see some better results coming out of 2025?
Well, there's been a lot of change that's taken place since spring of last year. It's amazing what a difference just one year can make. Obviously, there's been some changeover in personnel on the commission. You know, we do have a new chairman now. Last year it was Chairman Tom Baird. And then this year we have Chairman Dan Kildee. And there is quite a resume difference there between the two. You know, Tom was an attorney by trade and a trout fisherman. And I don't think that he had much of a knowledge base about things outside of trout fishing. Chairman Kildee is a deer hunter, and you know he's also a former congressman, so he comes packing a bit of a different skill set, which I think is of benefit potentially to the entire commission. He's certainly going to bring some leadership skills and some organizational ability to the table. And selfishly, I like having a hunter as a chairman. I think that's great. Now he's not me. He's not out spending thousands of hours a year slogging the swamps, but a win's a win. And if he hunts for a week a year, I'll take it.
Okay.
We also have the addition of Commissioner Becky Humphreys. She is formerly a DNR director many years ago. So she actually is a biologist. And I know that's a bit of a sore spot for a lot of people with the commission all the time. They say, well, they're a bunch of unelected bureaucrats. They don't know squat. They're not biologists. Well, that one is. And, you know, I certainly have heard some colorful stories about, you know, people's perception of her as DNR director in the past. And I wasn't plugged in during that time frame, so I can't and won't speak to that. All I'm going to do is judge her by who she is and what she does today. I've had several conversations with her that have been very good, very encouraging. I don't have to explain things about deer biology to Becky. She knows what's going on. So that encourages me to have a biologist on the commission. And she replaced David Kozad, if you remember Dave Kozad. But those are the two changes on the commission. I find them both to be encouraging. All the previous personalities are still engaged. With the department, there's been a little shift around there. Sarah Thompson is still our wildlife chief, but Chad Stewart has actually changed roles within the DNR a little bit. So, and I'm going to butcher his title, but it's something like regional species management specialist or something to that end. So he's no longer just the head deer biologist. He upgraded a little bit. In the interim, we have had a gentleman by the name of Chad Fedewa. I don't know if you guys have ever seen him around. Usually he works with turkeys, I believe. But he was kind of backfilling Chad Stewart's role for a little bit there. Did a good job. He was easy to work with. But Chad Fedewa is going back to his standard job here, I believe, in May. And the department is actually looking to hire a brand new head deer biologist for this coming year. So those are going to be awful big boots to fill, but they'll still be under the watchful eye of Chad Stewart, which I think is of benefit. He has, 11 years now, I believe, in with the state of Michigan. So that's kind of the DNR NRC moving parts. You mentioned the debacle of last year and kind of the dismay that gripped everybody following that final commission meeting, because let's be frank, not a dang thing happened, which was really frustrating. I know it was frustrating for sportsmen all across the state, and it was certainly more frustrating for the DMI members than I can begin to articulate without profanity. And we're hopeful that things are going to be a little different, because this is under the direction of the department and not the commission. We've got some different people on the commission. And I think to some extent, I guess in baseball terminology, you don't hit a home run on every pitch, right? Sometimes you step up, you swing and you miss. And last year was a swing and a miss. But the whole team learned a lot about the process and the mechanics of crafting deer regs, how to do that. And I think everybody's going to be a little more prepared going into it this year. and I don't want to say not so optimistic, but perhaps more realistic about expectations. Because the reality is that we're not going to be able to come in and craft a dream package and implement every single reg that everybody wants all at once, just one stroke, bang, done. It's just not going to happen that way. The commission is, I will say, gun shy of making too many really aggressive changes at one time. And I guess to some measure that boils down to public backlash as well, right? The social science side of things. But I think biologically too, you want to turn a dial a little bit and see what it does. You know, I use the salt shaker analogy. You know, when I was a little kid and I had my first encounter with the salt shaker, I put some salt on my potato salad. I'm like, wow, that's really good. So I grabbed the salt shaker and I put a whole crap load of salt on it, because if a little's good, a lot must be better. Well, it didn't work that way. And deer regulations are kind of the same way. You know, we need to turn that dial a little bit and see what happens, see what the response is, see how the deer herd reacts, see how hunters react. Maybe we turn the dial a little further. Maybe we go, oh, that was bad, and we turn it right back where we had it. There's a little bit of trial and error, a little bit of experimentation involved in this. And the best laid plans of mice and men aren't necessarily going to work the way we think they are. And that's the basis of science, right? You begin with a question and then you test. Do we know what we think we know? Does it work the way we think it works? That's the fundamental basis of science, questioning what we know, testing our theories. So that's kind of where we're at in a nutshell. I think that overall people are pretty optimistic. We did have a very short window of time to work for 2025. I think we finally got rolling like the end of January, when the team was completely seated and we began work. And unfortunately, the commission has requested of the department that we have all the deer regs finalized and in their hands in a WACO, WCO, Wildlife Conservation Order, mid-March. So we didn't have a lot of time, and there wasn't the time that we would have liked to delve deeply into some of the other issues. I know the Lower Peninsula team was really working on some buck regs for a while, and I don't think they were able to get across the finish line with any one thing. Last month at the April, well, it'd be this month still, commission meeting, Commissioner Walters had made an APR proposal, but there was some technicality and some legal jargon as to why the proposal couldn't actually be put into the conservation order. So I don't think that the Lower Peninsula is looking at a buck reg change this year at all. But I know that will definitely be a topic for 2026. So last year, one of the changes that really lit some fires was the Liberty and Independence hunts were changed to doe only. And I know that there were a lot of folks that were really passionate on both sides of that issue. So here's where it landed. The UP and the LP D.A.T, respectively, both supported the motion to restore antlered opportunity to both. So that would be your disabled or disabled veterans, and then your youth.
Good.
You know, a lot of guys support that, and they think it's a great thing for bringing young people into the sport. There's a lot of guys on the other side of it too. They're like, you know what? It's the dad shoot, and it's useless, and we shouldn't have it, and it's just an excuse. You know, I get it. I get it. I think there's two sides to every coin, but the reason that I looked at it the way I do, and the reason that I personally supported changing it back, is because of the reasoning for the change. So the reasoning for the change came from a conversation largely to do with the Lower Peninsula and more to do with Zone 3. That being, you got a doe problem. You're drowning in antlerless deer down there. You got really high deer densities. And there was kind of a hand-wringing festival of, we got to do something. What can we do? we got to shoot more does. And I guess for somebody, it seemed like a smart idea to saddle the disabled and the children with that responsibility. I look at it through a biological lens because that's what we are. Every team member is tasked with doing. Whatever we recommend, whatever we support has to be grounded in scientific evidence and defensible with data. So when I look at that change and I say, well, how do we make a biological argument for that change? I don't believe that we can, because when you look at the harvest totals across the state of Michigan, UP and LP combined across both the Liberty and the Independence hunts, that accounts for less than 3% of the total annual harvest. It's statistically absolutely, completely irrelevant. So to assert that forcing the disabled and the kids to shoot all does is going to make a difference, that's not true. There is no biological imperative that was driving that decision, which is why I can't support it. Everything we do has got to be biologically substantiated, and I didn't feel that it was. And, you know, I like to see people have an opportunity and having fun. There's the argument about the summer bachelor group bucks, which is legitimate. I mean, that bachelor group is going to be in the same corner of the same field every night at exactly 5:02. We know that. But to say that, you know, the youth hunt is ruining big buck hunting in the state of Michigan, that's, again, statistically a fallacy. It's inaccurate. There's just not enough of that happening to cause a biological impact. It doesn't matter. I mean, we've all probably seen a couple posts here and there of the 7-year-old girl that shot the buck on a dead run with her dad's 300 Win Mag, right? We've seen a couple of those. But I think that that's the exception and not the rule. And I would have a hard time imposing a regulation on an entire group of people because of a couple bad apples. I don't think that's right. There's a lot of dads out there that are doing it right, that are taking the time, that are teaching the kids, that are coaching ethical shooting. And I think that we need that at a time when hunter numbers are in decline. We need every recruiting tool we've got.
Oh, absolutely. So Jordan, with you know, it sounds like there's been a lot of positive changes with the commission, you know, the experience of a lot of returning members to the now D.A.T. And I know you can't speak real well on the lower peninsula. So up in the upper peninsula, what are some maybe main focuses on some change that you're looking to implement up there in the UP, if you could speak on that?
So my group in the UP managed to iron out 4 resolutions or 4 recommendations. The first one was, and I'm sure you're not going to be shocked, to do with wolves. You know, that's a hot button issue up here. And
you guys have wolves up there?
Well, three or 4, maybe 5, plus or minus 1,000. Yeah, so you know, the wolf issue is always at the forefront of some of these conversations, and as you know, they're still on the endangered species list, and it's a federal issue. I'm hearing that there's the possibility in the next year that through the Trump administration, some things that are going on in Congress with the Pet and Livestock Protection Act, there could be the possibility of a delist. But as of right now, and as of when my team made recommendations, are still on the ESL. So that's pretty much off limits for us. But what we did do is we wrote a resolution basically requesting that the Department of Natural Resources act immediately and institute the wolf management plan as soon as the wolves are delisted. No delays. That's the extent of what we're able to do on that issue. So that was number 1. Number 2, I already articulated that we were going to support the repeal of doe only for liberty and independence. So that was our second resolution. Number 3, we wrote a resolution supporting the reinstatement of year-round coyote hunting. Last year, that was a real hot potato. Of course, there's an ongoing lawsuit with MUCC and the MTPCA against the NRC over that decision. And we wanted to give our support to that group of hunters on paper, in writing. Obviously, here in the UP, we have an entire suite of apex predators. So maintaining maximum management control of the species we have management control over is mission critical for us up here. And you look at the time frame that they're wanting to shut off coyote season. Well, it's right in the middle of fawn drop. That's the most vital time to be shooting them, really, from a mitigation standpoint. The pushback always is, well, at that time of year, the furs aren't worth anything. Well, if you want to work, there's still things that can be done. My wife and I make things out of coyote fur. She uses pieces of the tails for crafting. She makes hats. She makes mittens. I'm working on trying to learn how to make some gaiters and gauntlets and things like that. And it's great to just experiment with it and get the feel of it, because then when you do, the following year, you get that nice December, January hide that's just gorgeous. You don't mess that all up because you already know what you're doing. You learned on something else. So anyway, year-round coyote hunting being restored was resolution number 3. But by far the most contentious and most difficult mountain to climb was resolution number 4, which was restoration of the archery doe tag to the entire Superior watershed. And that one, boy, that was a lot of tough conversation. We ended up passing that one on a 60-40 margin. We did have 2 members absent that day who would have voted in support also, but ultimately it came down 60-40. That's been a huge biological issue. So in 2015, the Natural Resources Commission, in response to public pressure, basically decided that it was a good idea to take away that archery doe tag option in the high snowfall zone. And that decision came on the cusp of 2 bad winters in 2013 and 2014, in which a significant number of deer did die. Ironically, that was Chad Stewart's first year with the Michigan DNR, was 2015. So they came to Chad and they said, Chad, we got to do something. And Chad looked at the regulations and said, holy cow, you got some of the most restrictive regulations I could think of. Like, what do you want to do? Well, let's not shoot any does. And at the time, the commission was advised that it wouldn't have the biological impact that they thought it would. And long term, it just wasn't going to be sustainable. But the commission chose to do that anyway. And I think there were a lot of UP sportsmen at the time that, on its face, it makes sense, right? Does make babies. So if we don't shoot the does, then we're going to have more deer, right? It seems like a simple enough conclusion. Unfortunately, you can call any respectable deer manager in the country, from Missouri to Kansas to Maine, and ask them if warehousing does is successful. And the answer unilaterally is no. It doesn't work that way. So it was agreed to on a temporary basis to help the herd. Unfortunately, over a decade later, the policy is still in place. And a lot of the old heads up here have carried this 1970s ideology forward that, we're going to worship the holy doe. We don't shoot any does. Not now, not ever, no reason, period. Obviously, we know a heck of a lot more today than we did in 1970 about the biology of deer and the mechanics of how all that works. So somebody at home right now is maybe scratching their head and going, well, I really don't understand why we need to shoot does. Well, let me explain. So here in a high snowfall zone in the Northwest UP, the deer have got a really tough hill to climb. Our deer do more with less, calorically speaking, than any other deer in the country, I would argue. And above all else here, carrying capacity is determined by winter habitat. So we have deer yards, or what we call DWCs, deer winter complexes. And 90% of the deer in the UP end up in 10% of the habitat for the body of winter. And unfortunately, a lot of our winter complexes are not in good shape. At one time, we had 122 uniquely identified winter complexes. And today, we only have 36. You can see there's a problem here. Of the 36 that we have, only 6 of them are meeting sufficient food and shelter metrics according to the Department of Natural Resources. So in plain English, in 30 out of 36 deer yards, every single winter, deer are dying because there's not enough food or shelter to see them through. So then we go back to cramming as many pregnant does as humanly possible into habitat that cannot support the current population level. And you see the problem. So a pregnant doe will consume on average about 2.5 times more calories than a doe that's not pregnant or a buck. So cram a deer yard full of deer that are all in hyperdrive, calorically speaking, and they're going to eat everything that ain't glued down. The problem becomes they do irreparable damage through overbrowse to these critical winter complexes. And then it's that much harder for the deer that do make it. You know, it's kind of like if you had 10 guys sitting around a table and you only had 5 steaks. We got an issue. But if you had even 6 guys sitting around a table and you had 5 steaks, you could probably make that work, right? It's the same concept. So the other biological issues that take place, a healthy buck to doe ratio is approximately 4-1. That's considered by and large to be pretty good in a wild free range herd. So a buck will lose 1/3 of his body mass index during a traditional breeding phase in a healthy 4-1 herd. So over the span of more than a decade here in the UP, where we continue to shoot bucks and we refuse to shoot does, you can see that the sex ratio becomes horribly out of balance rather quickly. And when that happens, it increases buck mortality rate. Well, why does that happen? Bucks are hardwired that they're going to keep chasing does as long as there's a doe in estrus until they drop dead. They will literally run themselves to death. I'm pretty comfortable on average across the UP. And granted, there's places that are better. There's places that are worse. But I'm pretty comfortable saying we're looking at a 12-1 buck to doe ratio on average pre-season here in the UP. So 3 times what it should be. So knowing what you were just told that in a healthy herd, a buck will lose 1/3 of his body mass index at 4-1. 3 times 1/3, that's a dead buck. When you triple his breeding duties, that deer is literally near death, complete exhaustion. So then you put that buck into a overbrowsed wintering complex with no way to replenish himself calorically. He doesn't make it. You end up losing a lot of your best breeding class bucks, you know, that December, early January, because they're so run down, they just can't make it. They can't get enough food. They can't recover. They're literally going into the deer yard with 0 fat reserve. And the thing about this is a healthy doe who's really put on the feed bag and hammered the acorns and whatever else, even when she goes into a deer yard in great condition, from the time that she gets in to the time that she leaves, she's losing reserves the whole way. She's bleeding fat. And you've seen probably pictures of some of the deer up here. You know, they come out with the puppy faces and you can see the hips and you can see the ribs. Those deer went into the yard in good shape. So you can see if you go in with nothing, you're not coming out. So heightened buck mortality is strike number 1 against the no does policy. So the second one is because of that elongated breeding phase, you're 3 times the normal breeding duties, that boomerangs on the back end. So in the springtime, instead of having this really nice, tight, concise fawn drop, and there's just fawns running everywhere, it's really stretched out. Fawns are going to be born over the span of 3 to 4 months. How bad is that? Well, we've seen spotted fawns here in late October, which is horrific. Those deer are obviously not going to survive their first winter. So there was a study done by Mississippi State University called the Predator Prey Project in collaboration with the department. And one of the things that they found was causing heightened fawn mortality up here was that protracted fawn drop in the spring, that they surmised it was easier for predators to dial in on and pick off 1 or 2 fawns versus if a coyote walks into a thicket and 15 fawns go blowing off in all directions, he can't really isolate one, which makes sense to me. So that was an interesting piece of the study. So higher predation rate due to elongated fawn drop, strike number 2. Number 3, half of those fawns this far north are born too late to put on enough muscle mass and enough skeletal structure and enough fat reserve to be able to sustain themselves through their first winter. So you're looking at probably close to a 50% fawn mortality just your first winter alone. Successful recruitment, you hear that term sometimes, fawn recruitment, right? What does that mean? Well, that means that the fawn was born in the spring and it survives entirely through its first winter to its next spring. That deer is then considered recruited into the herd. So close to 50% of our fawns are probably not making their first year. That's strike 3. Number 4, in areas where buck to doe ratio is proper and the deer are born at the right time, they'll get about that 80-pound threshold their first year of life. And that's considered deer puberty. So a doe that hits 80 pounds will enter estrus her first year. We have a percentage of our first year fawns that are not hitting 80 pounds before winter, which means those doe fawns will not breed year 1. So again, that's another strike against fawn recruitment. Whereas somewhere like, we'll just say zone 3, you got farm fed deer and they've got everything they need. They're going to hit that 80-pound threshold. They're going to breed year 1. They're going to have fawns next spring. We're not seeing that with a good percentage of our fawns. So by the time you're finished chalking up all the reasons for fawn mortality, you're not looking at a very high fawn survival rate. It could be as low as 20 to 30% in some cases, which you hear people say, well, the deer herd doesn't bounce back like it used to. Well, that's why. You have 20 to 30% fawn survival rate, and then throw a bad winter in there. It gets pretty hard pretty quick. So how do you fix all these things now that I've expanded on the biological woes and the problems? Well, it's really simple. You shoot does. Now, I'm not saying we need to be out here with rifles teeing off on them and wholesale knocking down the doe numbers. I don't think that's a smart thing to do across the Superior watershed. But prior to 2015, when they revoked it, we had the archery doe tag for more than 50 years across the UP. And that would include the winners of 96 and 97, which were record setting. We still had the archery doe tag. So there's precedent there that regulation is successful, that it hasn't damaged the herd. And of course, we have substantially less hunters today than we did even in, say, 1994. So for the critics who would say, well, my gosh, you're going to destroy the deer herd, we can't be shooting does, I go back to what I said earlier. Statistical analysis quickly disproves that. There's just not enough archers to do that kind of damage. And I don't remember exactly what the number was. So I'm just going to give you a rough estimate, but at its peak, archery harvest was something like 1 doe for every 7 square miles of UP wilderness. That's zero impact biologically in the context of, are we helping, are we hurting? So biologically speaking, it's important to try to maintain as balanced a sex ratio as you can. And being sensitive to the fact that in the Superior watershed, we can't treat it like zone 3. The archery doe tag restoration is the most conservative method that we have to do that. There's of course concern about crossbows, but again, I go back to hunter numbers. How many people are doing that? Not enough to matter. I'm hopeful that we can get enough people educated on the value of harvesting does and the biological impacts that more people will do that, because we do need to do that. Healthy sex ratios are a tenet of herd health, no matter if you're in Missouri, you're in Texas, you're in Maine, you're in Indiana, or you're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you got badly lopsided sex ratios, you do not have a healthy herd. So that's something that my team felt pretty good about as far as a flagship recommendation, if you will. It was really important to us to do something to help bring those ratios conservatively back into balance. And, the great thing about that is in this part of Michigan, there's still a lot of folks where having venison on the kitchen table matters. It's not recreation. It's part of the fabric of our culture and our communities and our way of life. And having venison on the family table means something. And I think it's important to provide that opportunity to our communities to do that.
Sorry, it might be a little noisy in the background. I had it on mute. So Jordan, kind of going from here, those are the four things that the D.A.T is working towards. So what are the next steps to hopefully establishing at least one, if not all of those recommendations? Where do you go from here?
Well, I went down for the commission meeting in Lansing here in April. I did speak to the archery doe tag issue on the record during the commission meeting. I also had the opportunity to speak off record, about the coyote issue and the wolf issue and the liberty and independence hunt issue. Those were all positive conversations. So at this point, I'm just trying to have all the conversations I possibly can with the right people to help shepherd these things through the process. And May 8th, down in Lansing will be the next commission meeting. And at that meeting, they are going to cast their votes to finalize deer regs for 2025. And I will, of course, be there and see these things through the finish line. It's a lot of phone calls. It's a lot of emails. It's a lot of biological conversation, a lot of networking. And there are days that I would certainly rather be doing something in the woods, but it's work that's got to be done, and I'm thankful to be in the position to be able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Us knowing you, we know how much work you're putting into this, and I imagine the rest of the D.A.T is in both the lower and upper peninsula. So our hats off to everybody involved with that. So we do have a couple questions. One that's not a comment, but a question that I have. Is there any buzz around a change in the meetings? They seem to be in the middle of the week when most people are at work, usually earlier in the day, so it's not even in the evening where people can attend. Have you heard any buzz about a potential change in meeting times, locations, and maybe even a virtual change where it can be online via something similar to Zoom, where more people have the chance to speak up and participate?
Well, I can't say as I've heard the buzz, but that's probably because I'm making the buzz. I'm talking with Senator Ed McBroom up here in the UP right now, and what I proposed to him was a need for change, just like you articulated, Tim. I went to him, I said, listen, Ed, the working class hunter is the backbone of the sport. Like, I don't know a hunter that doesn't have a job. I don't know a hunter that doesn't work. He says, well, yeah, I hear you. I said, so the commission meetings are all on Thursday mornings when everybody's at work. I said, tell me you don't want input without telling me you don't want input. And he kind of chuckled, and I says, we need to move the meeting. We need to move it to a Saturday. because that's going to facilitate maximum participation. Obviously you're going to have a cross section of guys that either is mandated or just loves that Saturday overtime, whatever it is, and that's fine. But I think moving it to Saturday provides the best opportunity for the broadest spectrum of people to attend. I'm certain there's going to be some pushback on that, probably from the commission themselves. But my disposition is this. The commission serves the natural resources of the state of Michigan, but they also serve the people of the state of Michigan. And being accessible is part of serving the people. And if you're making yourself inaccessible, I question how well you're serving the people. So up here in the UP, especially the Northwest end where I'm at, it is extremely costly to go down to a commission meeting. Because they start first thing in the morning on a Thursday. That means you've got to leave the day before. So you're talking about getting off of work on a Wednesday and driving all the way through. Then you're going to pay for a hotel unless you're fortunate enough to have, a friend or family member to stay with. Then you're going to get up first thing in the morning. You're going to spend all day at a commission meeting. And then you're going to drive all the way home and get up for work early 100 the next morning. All the fuel, all the food, the bridge toll. It's an expensive venture. That's the first mosquito of the season. And he's gone. So I'm in a position where I'm fortunate enough. I have some good friends down the Lower Peninsula that I come and see and that I stay with. So I don't eat the hotel room, but a lot of people who would choose to travel from my area to do that will. It could very quickly, between hotels, fuel, and lost wages, become $1,000 venture in a heartbeat. And there's not a hell of a lot of UP families that can afford $1,000 hit every single month to go and stand before the commission for 5 minutes. And that's the reality too. I drive 1,000 miles round trip and I stand before them for 5 minutes. I did the math on it one time, and it comes out to something like $47.62 a minute for me to speak. And that's without paying for the hotels. So another thing that I had proposed to Ed was, during COVID, they conducted these commission meetings virtually with Zoom. We had the technology, we had the capacity to do that. It's already been done. It worked. Why can't we provide that opportunity for Upers, or at least Western Upers at minimum, to be able to participate? Because the way I couched it to him was, it's almost discriminatory against disproportionately affected UP people, right? There's not a whole ton of $100,000 a year jobs over in my neck of the woods. A lot of working class folks that are living on 30 to 50 grand a year, raising families on that. And when it's cost prohibitive to go and advocate for the resource, I think that's a problem. There's no reason that it should be that way. It almost sets the stage of the haves and the have-nots. And if you have the money to go and do, or you're self-employed or independently wealthy or whatever the case may be, then the commission wants to hear from you. But if you're the working class bow hunter, maybe we don't need to hear from you. Now, do they mean it that way? I'm sure they don't, but it can very easily be perceived that way. So I think there's a lot of room for change there, and I'm eager to see what the legislature does with that, what kind of a resolution or a bill they come up with.
Okay, thanks for the insight there. One other thing before we jump on to the next question, I was talking with Ross from Sports Persons Ministries, which you know him, Jordan. He was telling me that just the importance of, the hunters from all across the state showing up. And he's been going to these meetings for 4 or 5 years. And Robert, I know you're very in tune to the meetings also, because I know you watch them online. But he made note that the anti-hunters, just a few years ago, there'd be one, maybe two of them to show up and speak at these meetings where, excuse me, sorry, getting a little smoke in the face here at the campfire. Where he said, as of recent, there seems to be more and more anti-hunters showing up at these meetings. perhaps maybe gaining some traction. Robert, Jordan, I'll kind of pose this out to you. Are you guys noticing that at these NRC meetings as far as them standing up and speaking?
Yeah, actually, I would say, especially, I mean, really since COVID started and we went through that whole phase of life, and really, I noticed like the last meeting, I think there was a few that ended up coming up and speaking, and I mean, they've got just as much right to be there and voice their opinion as we do, but yeah, there's definitely a change, and I would say numbers are definitely growing on that side of the fence when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I've noted the same change. I would say there's on average probably what 6 or 7, maybe 8 sometimes anti-hunter types that show up. Um, I'm kind of starting to think that they're literally just pulling 501s out of a hat, right before the meeting. Like they flip a dial and decide what to call themselves and walk into the meeting. We had one at the last one. I think it was chaplain for animals or something. I never heard of it before.
Yeah.
But I'm poking fun. I have no idea if they're legitimate or not. I guess anybody can step up to the microphone and say whatever they want to. It's not necessarily vetted, but the fact that new organizational names are popping up says something. Whether they're legit or not, it's somebody else sitting in a seat that wasn't before. Whether or not it's an individual or whether or not it's an organization that's 60,000 strong remains to be seen. But there are more anti-hunter voices showing up at these meetings, and I'll tell you what, people better start paying attention, because the world is run by those who show up, even if those who show up don't have your values. There's, and I hate beating this drum, but gosh darn it, there's been this apathy in Michigan hunters for a long time that, well, I paid my $35 to the Deer Incorporated Association of the World, so I did my bit for conservation. I did my part. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. What you did was subcontract your personal responsibility to an organization, probably to an organization that you haven't thoroughly vetted and don't know exactly what they're doing when they sit down to speak before the commission. Yeah, I've talked with guys sometimes after commission meetings, because they ask me, well, how'd it go? Who said what? What was the skinny? And I'll mention, well, organization ABC made some comments, to this end, and they'll say, no way, no way. I say, well, it's right there on recorded record. You can feel free to go look for yourself. Nobody's going to represent you better than you, period. And I'm not saying not to join a group. I'm not saying all groups are bad, but I'm saying you need to be personally engaged. You need to be responsible. And that's one thing I'll give the anti-hunters and the left, is they are engaged. They are making it a personal mission. They are showing up. They are bringing the emotion, the passion, the enthusiasm, and they are engaging. And at some point, we've got to match that energy. I pray to God we exceed that energy, frankly. But it's difficult, and we're right back to, it's a Thursday morning, everybody's at work, it's costly to go, all the impediments that exist. One has to wonder if it's not by design, right? I try not to get a tinfoil hat on too tight, but let's be realistic. It's imperative, absolutely imperative, that we show up, that we speak up, that we represent ourselves, we represent our communities, we stand for our views and our values. And I understand it's hard. But at some point, it becomes a question of this: what's your way of life worth to you? Is there a price tag? Can you put a dollar value on it? For me, I can't. I couldn't fathom raising my sons in a world where we didn't have hunting, or hunting was so highly ridiculously regulated that it was almost undoable. I couldn't, I don't want to see that. And I don't want to be doom and gloom and say that if we don't show up to the NRC meeting, that our whole way of life will vaporize. And, I can't say that. But I can say if we're not at the table, decisions are not going to be made in our favor and not in the best interest of our lifestyle. We have to be at the table.
Absolutely. Very well said. And when Ross and I were discussing the other day, it was eye-opening that, and you guys are just confirming it, they're making their presence known. So it's even more imperative that we make our presence known, or we have to accept the change that comes, if we don't put up the fight. So moving along here, we have a question. How do you guys feel about this whole baiting thing? I'm assuming Rabbit8783 on YouTube is referring to the proposed baiting license, I think, right? But you buy a license.
Just bring it back already.
All right. In the Lower Peninsula, and you can use bait again. I'm sure, I don't know what the regulations would be on that, how much you can put out and all that. I assume it probably looks similar to how it used to be, but
Shoot more does, drop some corn on the ground.
right. So, and we'll go around robin here, but my train of thought is the fact that this is even being considered says a lot about the science involved the first time around baiting and the ban of it. That how many years has it been since that?
Since Whitmer took office her first year.
Yeah. So
8 years.
8 years.
Like that,
Yeah. So apparently science has changed dramatically that it's okay again, that we are going to, consider this.
Kind of funny, how there's no CWD up in the UP or Wisconsin. That's all connected, right?
Right.
but we can't bait down here. But you can bait up there.
Right.
Pipe down, Dennis.
Yeah, so obviously we know how Dennis feels, and I'm the same way. You hear the debate, what's the difference between a food plot and apples or acorns that fall underneath the tree? Deer are a social animal. They're constantly touching nose to nose, and they're sniffing things, and then other noses come along. So to narrow out and target baiting just tells me that there's more politics involved than actual science. So to me, it's a bit ridiculous, but I think they found a way to make more money off of it, and so here we are today. Robert, what are your thoughts?
If you look back over time, and like when the whole CWD thing came in, and all of a sudden, we got to stop baiting here, and we got to do this, and we got to do that, like you said, no matter what, these deer are social. They're touching, they're rubbing on, branches. They're around each other all the time. So no matter what, if something is going to spread, it is going to spread. You're not going to stop it over a food source. But in the same hand, with them coming back with this, I've heard a couple of different things. I've heard it was a $20 tag, and they were going to allow like 5 gallons per site or something like that. I don't know. But either way, to me, at the end of the day, it's all about the dollar bill. I feel like if you were to walk into one of those NRC meetings at one time and lay down a huge chunk of money and be like, so what can we get done today? What can we pass? I'll guarantee you something's going to pass, but somebody's getting some money in their pocket. It's amazing. And there's so-called science that they supposedly go by. 90% of people are like scratching their head. What are you talking about? Where did you get this? Were you back in the 1940s digging in some archives or something? Like, so much of it just doesn't make sense anymore. Like, I could go on about the NRC and all of their so-called science, but
CWD is such an epidemic or whatever. How come the deer don't have to wear masks?
Yeah, Jordan. Yep.
Oh boy.
So Robert is right on the money. The proposed piece of legislation, and just to be clear, this was something that came from the legislature. this was not a DNR or NRC recommendation. This came through the Michigan legislature. But the DNR executive leadership did indicate that they would be open to that discussion. So the terms of that, as far as I've seen it, are indeed a $20 baiting license and 5 gallons of bait per day, spread over the whatever specified square foot area. What are my thoughts? Well, number one, if I pay my $20, does that mean chronic wasting disease goes away? No, it doesn't. I watched a really good speech about it. Some of you might know the guy. His name's Jim Sweeney. He's the CEO of Concerned Sportsmen in Michigan out of the Northern Lower Peninsula. He serves on the LP D.A.T. And Jim's pretty sharp with the CWD data. That's kind of his bailiwick. And Jim gave some testimony to that end about the baiting possibility. And he referred to it as a sin tax. And I about fell out of my chair laughing. He says, oh, that's how the government works. He said the government will turn the other way. They'll turn a blind eye as long as they can make $1 off it. And he pointed to the prohibition of alcohol and then the legalization, and the prohibition of marijuana and then the legalization. He says this is just another bullet point in the long list of sin taxes, that as long as we pay the sin tax to the government, that it's okay. I had to chuckle because the man kind of has a point. The jury's out for me on chronic wasting disease. Do I think it's real? Absolutely, I think it's real. In the same way that COVID was real. COVID's a real thing. Is it what they told us? I don't think so. Is chronic wasting disease what they say it is? I don't think so. I kind of think it's the COVID of the deer world. And similarly to how our state responded to COVID is how the deer world responded to CWD. Everybody went, we got to do something. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Ban baiting. Good idea. It congregates deer, and we know that in human beings, if we congregate a bunch of human beings, they're more likely to transmit disease. So let's do that. Let's not have deer congregating. I guess it's kind of not dissimilar to what happened to our archery doe tag in 2015. Everybody looked at it from a simpleton viewpoint and said, well, on its face, this makes sense. Let's just do that. And that's where we run into problems in natural resources decision-making, is when we do things for the purpose of being seen to be doing something. Science has to be the driver. Just like we talked about earlier in the conversation when I articulated why I can't support doe only for liberty and independence. Why? Because the data does not biologically support doing that. That's the mission statement of the Natural Resources Commission. And I quote, to make all natural resources decisions based solely upon the best available sound scientific evidence, end quote. I think that they were more concerned about public backlash at the time if they didn't, air quotes, do something versus the public backlash down the road for doing the wrong thing. And I guess I can see both sides of that argument. But, as I've said, for me, it lives and it dies on the rock of sound science. Justify what you want to do with science. Show me why. Tell me why. And if we can't do that, then we don't do whatever thing it is, whether it's going doe only on the youth hunt or taking archery doe tags or banning baiting. If we can't justify it in science and defend it with data, we can't do it. And I guess I would ask the question, and I don't want to throw people under the bus here, but let's be blunt. Supplemental feed for squirrels and porcupines and various birds flies out the pallet by the metric ton in the Lower Peninsula still to this date. And frankly, most of the people that were baiting before are probably still baiting for the most part. I'm not going to say everybody, because there's good, honest folks out there that say, hey, this is the law and I'm going to follow the law. But I think we all recognize that there's a large cross section of people that have just continued to bait. So given that fact, that reality, that air quotes data point, has CWD advanced across the state like this tidal wave of an Egyptian plague and destroyed our deer herd? No, it hasn't. So to me, there begins to be a biological argument that what we thought we knew is inaccurate. And maybe it's time to come back to the table and reevaluate the science. As I said earlier, good science is predicated on asking a question and then testing the hypothesis. Did this happen the way we thought? And I think in this case, the answer is no. Now, do I think that we should have to pay the sin tax of a $20 baiting fee? Well, no, I kind of think it smacks of let me sell you your rights back. I don't like that. If it was okay to bait before, and clearly it's okay to bait now, why do I now have to pay for it? That doesn't make sense. Now, I understand that the department is going through a hard time with funding and with the budget, and there's a big stink in the legislature about all that. They need money. I understand that. That's another discussion. I don't think that you start gouging people for frivolous things like baiting.
Yeah, absolutely. All good talking points from everybody. So, all right, there's really no other questions at this time. Jordan, if it's possible, maybe we can reconvene down the road and just talk about updates and progress made. And if maybe someone from the LP D.A.T could join us to talk about their side of things too, that would be fantastic. So if anybody's out there watching from the LP D.A.T, if you'd like to join us, please reach out. We'll line that up, and we'll get you and Jordan on, and we'll talk about that in the near future. So we're going to wrap this up for tonight, mostly because my battery's at 13% because we're running off of cellular data tonight here at the campground. So it's burning up batteries. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, tuning in. Jordan, thank you so much for your insight, your wisdom. It's definitely shed light on the whole process, and I think giving us a little bit of hope on this whole thing too. So, Jordan, thank you as always, and again, thank you to you and your peers on the D.A.Ts in both peninsulas. You know, the NRC and the DNR all working together to hopefully implement some positive change. So, Robert, thanks you for joining us tonight too, and all the viewers at home. Appreciate you guys, and hopefully we'll be seeing you real soon. Good luck out there if you're out there doing any turkey hunting, any morel hunting, fishing. Make sure you share your pictures, videos, stories with us, and we'll make sure we get those posted to the page. So, with that said, say good night, Dennis.
Good night, Dennis.
We'll see you guys.